Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how I decorated this striped buttercream cake with a festive design just in time for the holidays. So let's jump straight in. So as usual, I'm starting off with a ready crumb-coated cake which has been setting in the fridge so this crumb coat is nice and set. And for this cake, I'm doing white, pink and green buttercream stripes. So I'm going to start off with the pink buttercream. And I'm going to start by piping a sort of tube of buttercream around the base of the cake, keeping my hand as still as possible and using the turntable to turn the cake. Now this is really important, especially when it comes to stripes, because you want the stripe to be as straight as possible. You don't want your hand that's piping to move that much. Once I've done 2 rows, I'm going to move on to my next colour, which is the white buttercream, and do exactly the same. Now essentially, I'm doing what I would do even if I was to cover the whole cake in one colour, but because I'm doing multiple colours and stripes, I'm going to try and get each of these rows of buttercream as even as possible. And once I've done 2 rows, I'm going to the next colour, which is the green. The reason why I'm doing pink and green rather than red and green is because red buttercream is really difficult to achieve, so my Christmas is always pink and green when it comes to cakes. So starting just above where the white is, I'm going to go all the way around the cake, once again not moving the hand that's holding the buttercream and just rotating my turntable and letting the turntable do all the work. And then back to the pink. And essentially I'm going to keep swapping the colours, working my way up the sides of the cake. I think the hardest thing here is to actually keep the pressure as even as possible with my piping hand. And there's always a chance that you may go a little bit thicker with one colour, but essentially it's okay. Now sometimes the rows didn't come out as thick as I wanted, so I kind of went over some areas again with the colour. This isn't ideal because it may affect the straightness of the stripes, but I always say a cake's never going to be 100% perfect, and if you really don't like an area, you can always cover it up with decorations. So I've got to the top of the cake with the white buttercream, and I'm going to make sure that I really pipe even just above the sides of the cake because I want to pack in that buttercream at the top of the cake. And then apply some buttercream to the very top of the cake. Now it doesn't have to be as thick as it was on the sides of the cake, but just enough to cover so you can't see any of the cake coming through. So now I'm going to go on with my palette knife. And if it does need spreading out, you can do this first, but mine was good enough to go straight away with this rotating action like I do with most of my cakes. I'm holding the palette knife so the bent part is in the center of the cake, and now I'm going round with the turntable, again holding my right hand, holding the palette knife still and letting the turntable do all the work. Every now and then I'm going to scrape off the excess buttercream from my palette knife, and I'm going to keep going and letting that one edge of the palette knife create this beautiful, smooth, flat surface. Now this does take some getting used to, but I would always advise starting with the top of the cake like this, because as you can see, some of the buttercream is actually being pushed out over the edge of the cake, and that's going to help us achieve some nice sharp corners to this cake. So once I was happy with the top, I can now start smoothing out the stripes. Now, notice I say smooth and not scrape because I really don't want to be scraping off buttercream at this stage. I'm putting the scraper about 45 to 30 degrees towards the cake, quite close, and once again, keeping my hand extremely still. When you're doing buttercream stripes on a cake, you do not want to be moving that scraper because you want the stripes to remain in place. I go around a few times with my side scraper just to make sure all those pockets of air are nice and filled in. And once I have collected quite a bit on my scraper, I want to remove that excess buttercream because I don't want it to interfere with the stripes of buttercream on the cake. Now you can see the stripes are forming really nicely, but now it's time to start getting rid of those little imperfections like air bubbles or the lines left from the scraper. So I'm now going to go a little bit slower around the cake, and now I'm going to try and do some longer movements with the side scraper. So really trying to get almost my whole way around the cake each time. And that will ensure a smoother surface and hopefully remove as many air bubbles as possible. Now, if at any point you need to refill some of your buttercream, you can do so by applying some of the same coloured buttercream on the surface. However, just be careful not to apply too much because as you can see, it's kind of happened with my white stripe towards the bottom. The colours can start to overlap each other if they're not the same thickness. Once again, and I always say, we're only human and a little bit of blending between colours is really not a big deal, but you just want to try and avoid it as much as you can. So I'm just doing the last finishing touches by really smoothing out this buttercream. This is probably the hardest thing to do, even with normal buttercream cakes, not just stripes. So you really need to decide when you've gone around the cake enough times, because there is a chance of working a little bit too much on the cake and potentially ruining it or creating even more air bubbles as the buttercream is setting to the cake. And once I was happy with the overall finish of the sides, instead of cleaning off the very top excess buttercream that's been building up, I'm going to now set this in the freezer to chill and then cut off the excess to get some really nice sharp corners. So you can also set this in the fridge if you don't have room in your freezer, but a freezer just speeds it up. So now I'm going to slice off this excess buttercream that was built up at the top corners of the cake using my palette knife. You can also use a sharp knife, and essentially you're lining up the palette knife or knife with the top of the cake and cutting away that excess. And because the buttercream is so firm, you get this beautiful crisp sharp corner at the top of the cake. I tend to do this technique when I'm not applying, for example, more piping details or drips on the top of the cake that run down the side. When the buttercream is left exposed, I want a sharp corner, and this is the best way of doing so. Just be careful not to cut too deeply because you don't want to start messing around with the buttercream now the sides are smooth. And that is the striped outer coating done. And now it's time for the festive decoration. So for this cake, I'm doing a nice piped wreath on the side of the cake. And for this, I need a template of where I'm going to pipe. So I think this was actually a lid I used, but you can also just use a regular round cookie cutter and just mark a circle on the side of the cake. And what I did is actually darken that green buttercream that I had and put it in a piping bag with a small star tip nozzle. And using that circle as a guide, I'm piping a collection of rosettes and small stars in that circular shape. Now I was kind of improvising of where the rosettes and where the stars are going to go. I was just kind of filling up the space in this circular shape. I then just filled in some space to make it even more circular, just by piping in a few more smaller stars. And then I changed the piping tip to a small leaf tip just to add some small leaves to make it more wreath-like. So I filled in some gaps between the rosettes and stars that I had piped, and just piping in different directions to give an even fuller effect. I really liked how this was turning out, especially the contrast with the darker green buttercream. I think if I had left it the same colour green as I did the stripes with, it wouldn't have stood out as much. And now it was time to decorate the wreath. So what I did is actually got one large gold ball and put that at the top of the wreath, and then I individually applied smaller circular sprinkles around the piped buttercream. And I wanted to space them out quite a bit because I still wanted the pipe detail to come through, and I kept going until I was happy with the overall finish and look of the wreath. I also felt that as soon as I added those colourful sprinkles, the cake became a lot more festive straight away. But I wasn't quite finished because I wanted to decorate the very top of the cake too. So what I ended up doing was put all of the excess pink, green and white buttercream into the same piping bag with a small star tip. This was the same tip that I used for the wreath, and started piping rosettes and stars all around the edge of the top of the cake. Now this is kind of my signature way of finishing off a cake anyway, but I really liked the marbling of the buttercream as it came through the piping bag because all of the different colours came through. And I think this was just a really nice way to tie all of the decorations in with each other. On the very top of the cake, I added a few macarons and meringue kisses, which of course were in the same colour as the cake itself. And then got those same small sprinkles and just scattered them around the edges of the cake as well, just to tie everything together. And there we go, is my finished festive wreath cake. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I think what I love about this cake is that you can actually do this with any colours and it's suitable all year round. But I personally really love this design, especially around Christmas time. Try it out. Don't forget to tag me at George's Cakes because I'd love to see what you create. Happy holidays and see you very soon for more tutorials.